Hey y'all, it's Nikki. I have to tell you about Tecovas boots. I finally have a pair and they're handmade, high quality, stylish, and comfortable. I even got them customized with leather stamping. The folks at Tecovas will help you find just the right pair. So swing by for yours at the Tecovas flagship on South Congress or their store at the Domain. Plus, good news, they just opened a new store in Georgetown at 709 Main Street for those of y'all that live a little further north. So come shop with me at Tecovas. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. It's part of Austin's ironic past that our city saw both the beginnings of the women's liberation movement and the roots of the Roe case, and then watched state lawmakers strip those rights away. One woman has been on the front lines of it all. Today on CityCast Austin, how does activist Alice Embry keep her hope and perspective, especially now? It's Thursday, March 27th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I am here today with Alice Embry, author, lifelong activist, and Austinite. Welcome, Alice. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
So it's Women's History Month. So I wanted to ask you kind of like a lightning round question off the top to get us started. Who's your favorite Austin woman, living or deceased, and why?
Okay, I'll go with Judy Smith right now. And you probably don't know who she is, but I'll explain.
Yeah, tell us who Judy Smith is.
She was a graduate student in Austin and along with some other students started a birth control information center at the office of an underground newspaper called The Rack. It's what I call the backstory of Roe v. Wade that people don't know very much about. But at that time, women couldn't get birth control in Austin. Well, there was one doctor that would prescribe to unmarried women. And so they developed information about birth control. And then they started getting phone calls about abortion. So Judy's partner at the time was in law school. And Sarah Weddington, a very young attorney, the only woman attorney they knew. Through that, they arranged to meet with her and said, you know, I think we need legal protection. And this was the beginning of the Roe v. Wade lawsuit that was filed in 70 and became a Supreme Court decision in 73 and then governed really a lot of reproductive health care for many, many years, as we know, until Dobbs. I call it a backstory because it didn't start with a lawyer somewhere deciding to do it. It started with grassroots activism. And that's what I think is important. I want to make history accessible to people. That's why I wrote my book.
That's a solid answer.
Is that okay, Nikki?
Yeah, that's a solid answer.
It's a solid, long answer. I told you.
But it's still a solid answer. I didn't know who she was, and now I know who she was. That's a big deal.
Right.
So you grew up in Austin, and I'm curious, tell us what it was like for women back when you were a teenager. What do you remember about how women were treated here?
What newcomers and young people don't understand about Austin, Texas, is that it was part of the Jim Crow South. In my childhood and into being even a teenager, there were signs on the buses. There were 2 water fountains. One was cold water, one wasn't. All of the apparatus of segregation was around me. People they may not know that Barton Springs was segregated and that Joan Means started swim-ins there in 1960. And they may not know that the Texas Theater on the drag was segregated. And so there were stand-ins in 1960. And people get in line, ask for tickets, be denied, go back. And they got enough pressure on the theater chains to integrate. This was while I was in high school. Then when I got to the University of Texas as a freshman, dorms and sports were still segregated. Those were the first things that I got involved with. And one of them was a demonstration that was very gutsy demonstration in front of Consolving Dorm. It was just gutsy because it was 1 month after the assassination of Kennedy. And Linda Bird Johnson was living in Consolving. And so there were signs that said, delay makes the president's daughter live in segregated housing. It was carefully worded not to blame Johnson, but to blame the University of Texas for delaying any action on integrating housing. And somebody I went to junior high with, the University Junior High, ninth grade class, a group of African-American students came in, very small group, but among them was James Means. And so we went through high school together, and then he integrated sports by being the first African-American track person at UT. So I'm a freshman in 63. It wasn't until 70 that they actually integrated the football team. So this is the environment I grew up in. This is the power I saw in taking direct action and being an activist as a young person. And to remind people, this was before most of us could vote because the voting age was 21. So we were not participating in democracy as voters. We were participating in it as activists.
I also stayed in Kinsolving when I went to UT. So that's really interesting to hear. You've mentioned a couple of people that you've came across, kind of in your formative years. Who, as you were growing up, who in Austin did you admire?
Well, certainly, there weren't very many African Americans in the University of Texas at the time. I mean, I don't know, 150. I mean, I admired the heck out of their courage. Their names are unknown, but women like Grace Cleaver.
They're known to you.
They're known to me.
So they are known.
They're known to me. And I think it's so critical for my generation to pass on some of that history. It clues you into where to look, for the stories that you may not know about that shaped, the current period of time.
Yeah.
I just think it's important to pass that information on to younger generations, because when I became involved with the women's liberation movement in the 69, 70, I'm like, oh, well, there's a whole bunch of information nobody ever told me. And it was very empowering to understand, the links between the abolitionists and the suffragists. And, they weren't always perfect, but all these people had done things that had been concealed. Learning it can empower people.
So you came up through segregation and you started to become aware. You got to UT, I guess, in 1963, and you were seeing in action people kind of like, it was bringing about this activism and awareness. And 66, you became involved in the RAG, country's first underground newspaper.
It was the sixth. It wasn't exactly the first. It's first in Texas.
First in Texas. Okay. So then you say the women's liberation movement around 68 and 70. So what did that look like for you in Austin? Who was involved? How were you moving through that space?
Well, carefully. At first, I was a student leader in the sense that I got in trouble in a big free speech movement. There were 6 of us put on disciplinary probation, and I was the only woman. There wasn't a big cohort. So by 69, I was like, oh, let me think how this is really affecting me. Women begin to talk in consciousness raising groups, and they begin to share notes, and they begin to go, oh, I thought that was just my problem, but that's a societal problem. I was raised to think I couldn't do this and I couldn't do that. And so there was just all this energy and excitement and, we can change the world excitement. There weren't any women firefighters. There weren't any women EMTs, city bus drivers, cable splicers for Southwestern Bell. And so there would be efforts to get employment like that, break down barriers, file HEW complaints. But it was exciting. And there were women's bookstores. I learned to be a printer. We opened a print shop.
Sounds like a lot of energy and focus to create access, right? And so in
Yes.
spaces where we weren't seeing women, we weren't be allowed to work, we weren't allowed to show up. It seems like most of that, it was just like energy to create access and to create pathways for women.
And to address specific problems. So domestic
Right.
violence, rape crisis centers, healthcare access.
Services, access, space, quality of life.
Yeah, it was empowering and it set the stage for so many things that began to happen.
I'm curious if there was any kind of catalyst or any kind of like one thing in particular that stood out that you were a part of that you're just really proud of, that you're like, this one time we got this thing and it was hard and we did it. Because I think sometimes when we, especially now, I think that you need a win to continue the fight.
Well, in retrospect, I think Roe v. Wade was a win. Now, I think you say something very important. You need wins. And sometimes you win them and then they're taken away. And so
Right.
you need to both be pursuing the wins and pursuing the resilience to survive when they are taken away. And so I'm still working with younger women who are raising funds for abortion access, and everything's changed. They have to raise those funds to help women leave the state. But it's still happening. They're still answering the desperate phone calls, is what I'm saying. People are still out there. But you do have to get the resilience to go on. Let's just say we're in the pushback moment, is so dispiriting. And the other thing we did, and I think it was wonderful, is that we did skits. We did these things that disarm people, and they're so low tech. We did something called a women's cranky. So it's like a history of women, and you're unrolling a scroll, and nobody's on a screen. We're just like tambourines in a script, and people think it's funny, but they learn.
Right.
I think we're kind of back there. We definitely have to break down barriers, but it has to be fun. We have to understand that community is really fun. And isolation is really deadly.
Yeah, you have to sometimes be ridiculous. You got to be able to put yourself out there and put yourself on display.
We can't match the billionaires for their billions. We can only muster our own resources. And our resources have to be deep. They have to be based on building community and getting coalitions.
There's a new show coming to the Zach Theater, and it sounds incredible. Y'all have to go check out Bob and Jean, A Love Story, written by Robert Schenken, a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. So when Bob is deployed overseas and Jean tours with the USO, distance tests their devotion like never before. It's a wartime romance that captures the rush, thrill, and doubt of falling and staying in love. And y'all, this is a true story drawn from Schenken's own parents' letters. And it reminds us that even in the hardest times, love endures. So check out Bob and Jean on stage through April 19th. You can get your tickets at zachtheater.org. That's ZACH theater.org. Just off the Texas coast sits a unique beach town marked with salty vibes and sun-soaked memories. Port Aransas is a place where family traditions unfold naturally, and beauty lies both in island views and the unhurried moments between adventures. It's a place where multiple generations can get together under one roof to share slow beachfront mornings and cool Gulf breeze evenings. An island escape with 18 miles of shoreline to cast your line, kayak with the kids, or simply cruise the coast in a golf cart. One visit, and you'll see why generations of Texans have anchored their traditions to the island life. Start your new favorite family tradition in Port Aransas, Texas. Go to visitportaransas.com and plan your visit to Austin's beach. things are a little chaotic right now, specifically as it pertains to women's liberation. I feel like there's a lack of cohesiveness, right? We have Black women that don't feel like they are being considered in women's liberation. We have trans women in particular that are often completely left out of the conversations. And it does feel like we're a little bit fractured right now in these weird ways. So I'm curious, where do you think women's liberation stands right now? And how can we make it better?
You named all the ways. We need to heal the fracture lines and we need to coalesce. We need to not be talking about glass ceilings. We need to be talking about whether you can pay your bills. We need to be talking working class politics, not whether somebody gets to be a CEO that's a woman. We need to shift the emphasis, and we need to build sturdy coalitions. And all I can say is that after this, I'm meeting with a younger woman who I admire quite a bit for her activism, and I'm going to have that conversation, Nikki. But, it's like this isn't the glamorous work, but it's the get out of your own, don't isolate, and figure out in what communities you can move that are protecting the very vulnerable. Even if the protection is simply to not feel isolated. Some of those are faith communities. Trinity Methodist Church was a good example for me of a community that really reached out to trans people. And we don't always think, oh, now who do I know? Well, you grew up in Austin a long time, you know a lot of people, right?
Yes, too many people. Yes, if some might say too many people.
You do have connections that you may not think you have, and you can have conversations that you may not think you can. Some people go, oh, it's 1984, look at it, it's autocracy and da-da-da. And I'm like, I don't know. It seems they're trying to push us back to 1954.
Right. I think that sometimes people don't know how to start the conversation, especially when you start talking across lines. Like, even if it's like different ages, even if it's different race, sometimes it feels difficult to have those hard conversations just about how we can align, specifically women. My community is predominantly queer, brown, like that's my community. When you're thinking about your community, what advice would you give other women to start the conversation, like just to get it going? Because I think sometimes that's the hardest part. I feel like once you start talking, you're surprised. It just rolls and it flows, because at the bottom line, we both, women, we are kind of in these similar positions.
Well, maybe we need to identify some spaces for those conversations that are just like, I don't know, coffee houses or churches or whatever, where, we're going to do this. We're just going to have a meet and greet.
Yeah.
And we aren't really going to try to, solve the world. I mean, where would be good space to have exactly the kind of conversations that break down barriers? And I recognize that I'm considered like, oh, a boomer, talking about how great it was in the 60s and 70s. Like, who cares in many ways? But the point is the community of resistance we built then is applicable now.
I mean, and listen, not for nothing. You did not say that it was great in the 60s and 70s.
No,
you said exactly the opposite. You said
it was hard.
You know what I mean? There are some people that, yes, they have that sentiment, but that is not what you said. You said things were hard and it was kind of gross and terrible for Black people. And and you just don't hear that a lot. You don't hear that admittance a lot. I think that for me, everywhere is a place for that conversation, just because things seem really dire right now. But I think you're right. I think it's easier to have those conversations in controlled environments. So maybe someone's house, if church is your thing, church.
Uh-huh.
I'm curious right now, today, what is most needed in today's women's liberation movement? What would you do if you were in charge and you could be like, all right, ladies, women, everybody, I'm in charge. Where would you start with today's movement?
Well, the first thing is that I wouldn't try to be in charge, and I would try to find at least a co, or maybe, poor people would be better, and go in and say, okay, look, we're starting from zero. We're going to start having
Right.
conversations about how to break down barriers between us that exist for age, for class, for whatever barriers are out there. I mean, we wouldn't be the only person in charge, because that would be like,
Right.
she's really old and white. and heterosexual. Yeah. I mean, come on. It's
like... So I'm curious, what is your advice for college students and other young people now who are working towards social change, especially in the light of like recent deportations, the abortion laws, the anti-trans legislation, like the attack on the Department of Education? I mean, it just, it feels like every day there's something else. What's your advice for young people that really, really want to stay and fight? They really want to make change, but are maybe exhausted or don't know where to start.
Look for those spaces to find like-minded people. I mean, the university used to have this it was called the Chuck Wagon. It was, it's like the coffee was 7 cents. It gives you an idea of,
wow,
what good coffee. I mean, but it was, but you could drag the chairs around in this open area and people just sat there. I mean, it was like our living room. Do you need to find and claim spaces and maybe make them known to people, and space and time? Hey, we're all getting together here at such and such, and begin just conversations. So, and do not isolate. Do not think you can just be active on your phone or your computer. So there are places like that where you can kind of plug in, and then they have happy hours, and they have, you get to know people, and it may not be the right fit for you, but by getting to know people, you find out what is the right fit, and I just really feel that we're back in a moment where the cavalry, it's not going to come. It's not going to come save us. We're it.
Right.
Where do we begin to just have conversation and talk about what might work? New people and young people, they don't know anything about what Austin was like way back when. Maybe they don't want to.
Yeah. I mean, but it's part of the problem.
There's a documentary, and I'm hoping it's going to show in Austin soon, but it's called The Lone Star 3, and it's about the women, including Judy Smith, who did the Birth Control Information Center. So that would be, once it shows in Austin, a place to have conversation. Hopefully there'll be a panel after it and evoke some conversation.
I love this advice of find and claim space. I'm glad that we're having a conversation with you as we're moving into this really trying time. I mean, it's got to be like Groundhog Day for you. Just like history repeating itself, which is also kind of terrifying, right?
Is.
Like
it's
to
terrifying.
See your work kind of being like brought back or undone. Do you have any other parting words as someone who has been here and seen how bad this can get?
So I have a friend, I'll probably mess this quote up, that he says, you don't always know when you're making history that you're doing it. There's not an index. There's not a, table of contents, later.
Right.
And this is, Jane Fonda was like, have you ever seen a documentary about Selma or about Stonewall? We're in our documentary moment. We're in it. Don't forget to have fun. Don't self-isolate. Don't think that organizing happens on a phone. It doesn't. It happens seeing people and talking with them.
Face to face.
And learning their stories. The other side wants you to feel dispirited. Don't let them have it. Don't let them have that. That's your soul. So things can change. Things will change. And we're in our documentary moment again.
Oh my gosh. Alice, thank you so much for being here. I don't know. I really hope that people understand the power that we have. So I appreciate you coming on and talking about it.
Oh, we have power. They don't. They have money and we have power.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Alice Embry's work in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.